Reconozco que mis colegas sí son entre usted y el muerto, así que vamos rápidamente. Y con su permiso, le cuento mi historia en inglés, ya que mi español es limitado a 5 palabras. Sí y no, por favor y gracias, y cerveza. So you've had the best of my Spanish. I will go quickly, but I would like to talk to you today about stories, about telling stories, because that's what we do in our company, and we like to tell them the most about magical things, and destinations are magical things. Wrong button. Here we go. So, we have always told stories. We are creatures who are small. We don't have scales. We don't have claws. We don't have teeth. We took over an entire planet by telling stories. We've always done it. It is the one unique thing that our species does. So storytelling and stories are at the root of everything that we do and everything that we create. We talk a lot about the market, el mercado. And in the ancient times, the market was not just the place to buy things, it was the place to exchange stories. Stories like Alibaba, fantasy stories that everyone took home and told in their own way. I would argue with you that particularly with destinations, the market has not changed a bit. It's still about stories, about the stories that you take home when you visit. The world is a very different place now. So I have labeled it World 4.0, just as a conceit. And let me just explain a little bit about what's going on in this new world that makes storytelling so important. First of all, it's a village, very, very, very small. It's very networked, es global, it's about minds, touching minds, it's very volatile. One day things are here and then they evaporate quickly. It's evolving at an ever faster pace, and more than ever, it is about being a participant. We're all a participant in a world narrative that's going on. The role we play in that story is a bit determined by how we do it. Here are a few things that I will tee up as just support for this argument. We live in the age of story. 3 billion social media users on 500 sites or more worldwide, probably more than that because this statistic's a week old. People spend up to 10 hours a day with all forms of media. Think about that for a minute, 10 hours a day, that's a lot. A little more than half of that media use is digital media, which means it's not on television, it's not in the newspaper, it's not in a magazine. It's digital media. And of that, almost half of that is social. So people going back and forth on social media platforms. In fact, it's so powerful that social media networks earned an estimated $8.3 billion just from advertising in 2015. And that's money earned without any ability to prove that it works. It's simply such a huge audience that the advertisers have to go there. Facebook adds 500,000 new users every day and a new profile every 6 seconds. There are 500 million tweets a day. That's about 6,000 new tweets every second. 300 hours of new video are loaded to YouTube every minute, with about 3.25 billion hours of video viewed every month. That's a lot of video. So what does this mean? What do we take away from this? Well, it's my bias. But what I take away is this. People are spending an awful lot of time telling stories to each other. So how do we harness that as destination brands? Well, first, we have to step up to the plate and we have to own it. Who is telling your destination's or your city's story? If we don't tell it ourselves, if we don't tell it intentionally, other people will tell it, maybe even our competition. And we won't want the story to be what our competition says. So we have to own a story first. This is a picture of the internet. Usted está aquí. Maybe not. But here's a stunning thing. The internet today is almost an antique compared to how it will be within the next 10 years. We will go to an environment where Cisco says the internet capacity will increase to a petabyte per second. That's a large amount of data. That's equal to all of the content in all of the collegiate libraries in North America in 1 second. A couple of the futurists in Silicon Valley have suggested that by 2040, the intelligence and problem-solving ability of the World Wide Web by itself will exceed that of a human being. I'm not sure I want to be there for that, but it doesn't matter what I think. So what does that mean? Well, the world is fundamentally different. So these are the rules for World 4.0. This is my poster child for World 4.0. First, it's all about me. Everyone is an audience of one. And nobody thinks they have any time. Time poverty is universal. That leads to what we call experience inflation. And as much as I don't want to offend, in Caribbean destination marketing, what that looks like is everyone has a beach, everyone has a palm tree, everyone has coconuts, everyone has golf, everyone has an ocean. How do we make our stories distinctive or our destinations distinctive? Because not everyone has the story of Puerto Rico or the story of Cartagena or wherever we are, right? And of course, typically, when we miss the audience, what do? We talk faster and we talk louder. And that wears the audience out and they just back up. So there are a couple of things that I think can help us with this. One is make sure we have a powerful story. Make sure we have connected that story with broadband consciousness. The internet out there is not as important as the internet in here, because we're all addicted to our phones now. That means there's always an audience ready to hear your story if you could just tell it to them. And finally, we have to remember that experience is in charge. The experience rules. Said another way, you can't hide anymore and you can't lie anymore because there's TripAdvisor, right? So we have to tell the truth. Therefore, we have to make our experience as good as our brand. So this is the new human being. Text, games, social media, constant contact is the new operating model for the human being. So what's that going to look like? Well, mainly, it's going to be about quality. So the old paradigm was, how much information can I get? The new paradigm is not how much, but what does it mean? What does it mean to me? That's the notion of curation. So an effective destination story today has to serve up relevancy to that individual, that audience of me. And it's got to be delicious. It's got to be savory. It's got to taste better and different than anybody else's. So let's talk for a minute about brand. This is my favorite quote about brand. It's from Jerry Garcia, who founded the Grateful Dead. If you're not old enough to know who that is, come see me later and I'll explain it. But the Grateful Dead exemplify this. Don't be the best, be the only one. That's truly brand. So, your brand is actually built on the backbone of a story. In fact, this is our definition of a brand, because we do a lot of branding. It is the narrative bridge, the story bridge, the bridge built of the tales of your destination that connect your reason for being there with your audience's reason for caring about you. If your brand is anything less than that, it will fail. So getting that story right is extremely important. You also have to offer distinction, or you become an ordinary commodity. Right? That's not a good thing. When we talk about great story themes for destination brands, then we want to talk about craftsmanship, integrity, originality, not just your brand equity, but the equity that your audience can own in your brand. How do you make it my destination? And of course, authenticity and altruism turns out to be very, very important these days. So the sense that whoever you are and whatever you're doing it for bigger reasons than just profit. So a really good marketing program, a really good storytelling program is a living system, right? So kind of like this tree, the marketing is like the leaves. You know, they come off in the fall, they grow new in the spring, and that's the way your advertising and your marketing, your communication programs work. The brand, on the other hand, is much more like the trunk of the tree. It has to hold up the entire tree, just as your brand needs to be holding up your entire story in the marketplace. And the secret is the roots, which are really those elements of that distinctive story that feed the whole brand. So in the 21st century, there are differences between the way we talk about brands now and the way we used to talk about brands 10 years ago. First, we've moved from a what-centered to a why-centered. That's about that relevancy again. Second, we can't sell anymore on features and benefits. We have to sell on solutions. What's the result of a guest coming, not what do they get to buy. Third, we're no longer in a statistical model. It's good to have marketing data, but data alone will never get you there, because we live in the age of what's called likeonomics. I like this, so I will buy it. More importantly, I am friends with those people, so I will buy what they sell. That's a critical factor, particularly when people think about leisure travel. And lastly, it is too expensive in a market in which people have 8 seconds to give you of their attention to try to advertise your way to market share. You have to create ambassadors, send them out in the world, and have them bring people back with them. So exporting ambassadors is a key strategy in 21st century branding. So I'll wrap up with some things to think about from the standpoint of your cities. So in your story, the city, your destination, is the hero, and that story plays out on the world stage. All of these stories are expressing or enacting a classical human myth that's been going on since we came out of caves. For a destination, your story is your compass, and if you lose your way, you will find dragons. Brands that begin to lose their luster, brands that begin to fail, are brands that have forgotten their story or failed to keep their story in line with the world as they see it. So it's very important to keep this story fresh. But you're saying, but I'm a mayor. I'm not a storyteller. Well, you got elected somehow. We'll leave that alone. I would argue that it doesn't matter who you are. Every single time you talk about your destination, you are literally enacting a myth. And myth is a good thing. It's a good thing. It doesn't mean a lie. It means a story that people use to figure out how the world is. And every time someone talks about your destination, you want them to enact and inhabit that myth. So here's just a few storytelling tips before I leave you. One is, make sure you know and you love your audience. You don't have to like them, but you must fall in love during the storytelling. You have to picture the world as it will be after the story before you start telling it, or you won't know how it ends. Very dangerous. Third, there's a special language we like to talk about for storytellers. We call it kitchen table ease, which means the way common people speak. Speak in the language of your audience. I don't mean Spanish versus English. I mean in the tone, in the voice, in the demeanor, in the approach, in the respect. If you're going to be a storyteller, you have to be courageous, because when you tell your story, you are creating reality for someone in their mind. You can't go halfway and say, I was just kidding. You have to go for it. So you have to be courageous. You must tell stories that paint pictures in the mind. The audience always brings half or more of the story with them, so you have to be conscious. What narrative does my audience have going through their heads? For instance, right now, I know that part of the narrative here is we would like to go to lunch. And finally, today especially, and this is really key to destination branding, you have to make me care. Your story has to have heart. So I will leave you with one thought, which is, I think, still true today, and it was said thousands of years ago. The people who control the story control the world. And that's how powerful storytelling is, particularly when we're talking to people about something as subtle as a brand. Gracias. Thank you very much.